Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have John Hall. He's a former Fortune 100 tech leader turned executive performance coach. Welcome to the show, John.
AJ, thanks for having me here.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India in this online format. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll be talking about how one can breathe their way to success. And in that, we'll talk about your BPM method. But before we come to that, John, help us understand a bit about your journey, your background, so that people learn directly from you about you.
Yeah, absolutely. I was in Fortune. Well, I worked for JP Morgan Chase for 25 years. I was a tech exec for 30. And part of what I did at JP Morgan Chase, I was an engineer. I wasn't a coach. I was an engineer. But part of what I would do is parachute into troubled tech areas that were unstable or had issues, and I would turn them around. I was a fixer. And of course, we know technology itself doesn't misbehave. It's the people and the process inside of it. And so I was going in and turning departments around. And people started coming up to me years later saying, I remember this advice you gave me. I remember you telling me something, and it didn't just change my career, it changed my life. And so I went through my own personal time. I went through a divorce and was like, well, what happened? How do I make sure this never happens again? Went deep into personal development and started finding just a lot of linkages, taking my engineering mind and applying it to a lot of the personal development work and starting to understand it better, starting to understand how stress impacts us, starting to understand how stresses actually can be a key to peak performance when we handle it right, and really diving in deep into the mind-body connection, which just fascinated me. We like to think that we're logical beings that sometimes have emotions. And the reality is we are emotional beings that sometimes tap into logic. And that was a tough thing to swallow as an engineer who thought I was very, very logical and very, cognitive. Beginning to recognize that's our superpower, right? When we start to embrace our body and like all of us is really where we can tap into peak performance. And that's how the BPM framework came to be.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, John. Now, let's talk about stress. You talked about stress. Let's talk about stress. People, a lot of people, when they talk about stress, think about stress, it actually leads to stress because it is considered to be, stressful talking about stress itself. And you talk about, stress, transforming stress into peak performance. Now, God designed us in a certain way. You are an engineer, you know designs better than anyone else. I am the last person to understand that. But we are talking about it. So let's talk. Now, God designed what is the opposite of stress in a positive way in us that leads us to peak performance, that we don't have to
Yeah.
think of stress. We will come to the stress part so that there must be something which ideally because of the lack of stress in anyone's life, how do they reach peak performance? Then let's come to the stress part, how we can transform that into peak performance.
Absolutely. Such a great question. And it really fascinated me as I started researching this to discover that there's actually three different types of stress. So there's a type of stress called new stress, which is where we read about stress in somewhere else, right? We read about an earthquake in another part of the world, and that's stressful, but we aren't directly involved in it, right? So that's new stress. Then there's what we typically think of as stress, which is distress. Distress is it's bad for us when it's long term. Now, short term, there's an evolutionary reason for it, right? If I was walking through the woods and all of a sudden I came across a tiger, that would be very stressful. That would be bad stress. I might be attacked. I might be killed. But my body's going to react in such a way to prepare me for the best chance of life, whether I fight or I flee, right? I run. My body, there's an evolutionary response to short-term distress that is actually healthy, but we tend to live in long-term distress. We tend to live in distress just day in and day out. having the same chemicals dumped in our body as if we were being chased by tigers all the time, even though it may be a business report or the news that our in-laws moving in with us for 6 months. But then there's the third type of stress, which is called eustress. And eustress is actually good stress. It's healthy stress. It's something that actually can spur us to peak performance when it's combined with other elements, right? There's about 13 different factors that factor into achieving peak performance, but eustress is one of them. I'll give the example this way, because support, a big part of the difference between eustress and distress is the support that we have, either the support we have within ourselves to handle stress, which is what I work with people on, but also the support we have outside, which is where I help teams achieve peak performance. So consider this example. You're in a stadium, you're watching your favorite sports team. It's the championship, it's the winning play, your team, your player, right? Your star player is out to make the winning play. Maybe it's a penalty kick. Maybe we'll say it's what we call soccer in America, but football everywhere else. So it's a penalty kick. Your star player comes out. There is stress in that moment because it's a big play. There's a lot on the line. There's a lot there. But that player's trained for it. He has a team supporting him. He has coaches, right? Assistant coaches, everything. Right? He has a support network behind him. They have training for this. So that is eustress. That will actually drive them to peak performance. But now imagine, same scenario, same stadium, same championship, same game-winning penalty kick. And now the voice calls out from the stand that says, AJ, come on down. You're kicking this. You haven't done this in years, maybe, right? You're now being put on the field. They call another random people from the crowd. That's your team now that you've never met before. And by the way, they publish your cell phone out on social media. So if you miss the kick, everybody who's a fan knows who to contact. All right. So now imagine that same scenario, but we've now created distress because you don't have the support yourself. You don't have the support of the team. Right. So that's really the difference, is understanding distress and eustress and how to transform distress into eustress to achieve peak performance.
Right. I will come to the BPM part after this question. So people who do not have any stress, what is their that golden rule or the golden nugget for them to achieve peak performance? How do they do that in the absence of stress in their lives?
Well, I challenge that to some degree, because if someone doesn't have any stress, I would say that they aren't pushing themselves big enough, right? There may be people that are absolutely the state that they're saying, hey, I have no stress, but most of us here on this earth, unless we've kind of gone up to, full enlightenment that we have no stress anymore, most of us do have stress factors. And most of it comes because healthy stress is caused because we're challenging ourselves, right? I'll give you an example. I had a major project that we had a tech division. It supported over 15,000 people. It was failing. We had to do an upgrade. And normally an upgrade of this sort, a hardware upgrade, would take a full year. And then I went and, I knew that it was an emergency. My boss had asked me, hey, I really need you to do this in a shorter period of time. So I cut it down to 6 months. And he came to me and said, I'll give you 3. That's all I can give you is 3. And we took this project that would have been a year and we cut it all the way down to 3 months. Now, it was intense, but we were able to make that stress into peak performance because it was a challenging situation. So I don't meet a lot of people that work in life day to day, right, that don't have some sort of a stress. But I will say the people that say, well, I'm not really stressed, what they've typically done is exactly what I train people to do. Expanding their window of tolerance so they can handle more chaos and adversity in their life. That's part of the BPM framework. But also learning how to transform stress tactically, using breath to transform stress tactically. So when it comes in, you don't have to stay there, right? You can move it into this place of, sometimes people even describe good stress as almost just more pressure, but not stress, right? So it may be a definitional thing there as well.
Right. So let's now dive deep into this BPM framework of yours: breath, physiology, and mindset. Help us understand first the breath part. We all breathe. Without it, we won't be living. But how do we actually optimize this breath part? Help us understand so that even from a common person's perspective, they understand it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I found is a lot of times people think meditation is the absence of thought, right? But it's really not. It's focusing your thought. And so I found that breath is one of the best ways to focus our attention. Because what happens is when we tend to get stressed, our mind tends to take control, right? Our mind starts moving in every direction. It's thinking about what could possibly go wrong, where things have gone wrong in the past, how they can happen again, right? All the emotions can start flooding in, whether we're acknowledging them or not, that can come in. So when we're in a stressful situation, we can often get so wrapped up that our body's on this natural evolutionary response, but we don't need it at that moment. We don't need to imagine we're being attacked by tigers. And what's going on in our body is that our prefrontal cortex actually shuts down. When we get stressed and our heart rate goes over 100 beats per minute, the science shows that the blood rate to our prefrontal cortex, which is our logic center, starts shutting down. And a lot of times we'll start telling ourselves, well, calm down, get it together, let's focus, let's go, right? We use our mind to try to overcome this. And it's about as effective as having like a 6-year-old girl in the kitchen telling an 800-pound gorilla to calm down, right? It just doesn't work. So what I found, the first step in the BPM method is breath, because breath, whether we're doing this tactically, strategically, or to shift limiting beliefs, breath is this beautiful transition between what we don't have to think to breathe, but we can also think and breathe. And that puts our focus on a single thing, which is the breath. And then I teach a very specific breath, which then is signaling to our body to calm down. So we're using our mind to take a breath. The breath tells our body to calm down. Our body then tells our mind to calm down. It creates this self-reinforcing loop as we start to do this.
Right. And what about physiology?
So physiology is now we get into the mind-body connection, and there's just fascinating research around this, right? There was a study done in the UK that found that clinically depressed people that smiled in the mirror for 10 minutes, they just forced themselves to smile in the mirror, whether they felt like it or not, it was as effective as Prozac in treating clinical depression. So think about that. Forcing yourself to smile in a mirror for 10 minutes was as effective as a drug for overcoming clinical depression. Amy Cunny's done amazing work on this. There's TEDx talks where she's shown doing a Superman pose, where you put your arms out in front of you like Superman, and holding that pose for a number of minutes actually increases testosterone, decreases cortisone, the stress hormone, increases self-confidence, and it makes you more able to take appropriate risk. And there's just tons of research around this. So what I do in the physiology, and again, this is a simple example, and I work very deep in clients with this to tailor it for their specific needs. But when we're in a stressful situation, our physiology is such that we tend to clutch in, whether we're aware of it or not. We bring stress up to our shoulders, our chest. It may not be as extreme as this, but we'll tend to bring our arms in to protect ourselves. We'll tend to bring our shoulders in. There's a lot of tension in our body that now, again, our body's signaling our brain, we're under tension, we're under stress, we're in danger. So first step, breath, a very specific breath that I teach in this situation. There's lots of different breaths I use for different ones. But a breath starts to signal body to the brain to calm down. Physiology, right? We open up our chest, we relax our shoulders, we deepen, we drop into our core, we drop into our seat, right, that we're in. And that's the second stage. So what happens now is we're sending 2 signals from the body to the brain, right? And there's something called the vagus nerve that this communicates on. And we're sending 2 signals now to the brain to say, let's calm down, we're safe, we're okay. And it starts releasing that hijack and letting blood flow come back to the front part of our brain.
Right. And what about the mindset part here?
So the mindset is now that we've doubled down, we've sent multiple signals from our body using our breath and our physiology. We've sent multiple signals up to our brain, allowing ourselves to restore focus. Now the mindset is such that we can start to shift our thinking to something that's more positive, that's more open, that's more focused. Here's a simple question I've taught people. I've taught clients all the time. When we get stuck, when we get into a focus, when we start thinking that something, we can get frustrated, start thinking that there's no way out of something, or we're out of options. The questions we ask ourselves, and there's fascinating science behind this, but I'll keep it very high level for now. The questions we ask ourselves start determining our mindset, start determining our outcome. We have our mind has a component, a part of our mind called the reticular activation system. And the reticular activation system is like a targeting system. It's always on, it's always working, and it's looking for things to focus on, right? And what happens is too, you can't tell it to not look for something, right? If you say, don't look for anything that's yellow, your mind's probably going to immediately jump on screen and see, right, the yellow, right? That's just that. You'd say, AJ, don't look at yellow, right? But that's your reticular activation system. It's going to focus on and find more examples of what we're focused on, right? And then there's something called confirmation bias that comes in, some other things that come into our mind. So with the mindset, now that we've sent the signals from the body to the mind, now we can start using our mind to focus on other things like, well, what if this was possible? What if there were options, right? What is the reality of the situation that I'm in? And so now our mind can start to come online, and also our mind can reinforce our body. There's something called priming, where the thoughts we feed into our mind can actually impact our physiology. This is a fascinating study. One of the examples that was done, they gave 2 sets of college students test. One test was just neutral words. The other test had words like Florida, gray, Walker, right? Florida is a state in the United States where a lot of retirees go, right? It's a retirement state, a lot of, or used to be. And so they were words that were related to aging that the students would associate with aging without necessarily saying old age. When the students went to walk down the hallway to drop off this test, the students with the words related to aging walked 20% more slowly than the students with neutral words. When they were asked about it, they denied that they did it. They denied the words had any impact. And they denied that this had anything to do with the speed that they chose to walk. But the reality is the words that were fed into their brain impacted their physiology. So again, if we're looking at things, and there's, again, some of the things that I work with clients on, there's a difference between whether we identify, right? So if our mind says we're using willpower to do something, like I can't eat chocolate cake because I want to be healthy, or I don't eat chocolate cake because I am a healthy person. There's a difference between willpower and identity. Identity beliefs are 50% more likely to help us achieve our goals than willpower, right? So imagine if I was going to tell you, AJ, I can help you become 50% more likely to achieve your goals, right? I mean, what kind of a deal would that be? That's an amazing, amazing offer, right? And that's, again, how we start using mindset to achieve that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you work with a lot of founders and entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Why do they need this BPM framework? They are supposed to, uh, be able to lead the team, do everything new. They are strong in mindset, in vision, in thought process. Why do they need this? They themselves are at the peak of their performance in their own way. I want to understand them. Why do they need it? Do they lack something somewhere? Or is it peak performance is about adding more than what you actually have, optimizing them actually?
Well, it's both, right? It's both. And I love how you describe that, because a lot of times we do look at entrepreneurs and founders and we say, oh my gosh, that's amazing. They stepped out. They,
Right.
they have this amazing vision. They're at the peak and they're doing so well. And there's always more, right? There's always these founders and entrepreneurs that I work with that are so successful, right? They are constantly investing in themselves. They're constantly investing in their performance, in their mindset, in their capabilities, right? They're constantly investing in personal development. But when you speak to founders and entrepreneurs directly, what you find is that they're all on their own journey, and especially in the early stages, like seed to Series A, even Series B. In the US, those are funding stages for different
Right.
startups. And they're facing a lot of this is mindset work, right? They may have a brilliant idea, but what happens is as you start stepping out, you start stepping into this new role, all of this mindset, all of this identity belief, all of this stuff comes flooding to the surface. And in fact, that's why I have a course called Overcoming Imposter Syndrome that is available on my website, because that is something that a lot of founders feel is that I don't really belong here. This isn't really real, right? Especially as they're trying to build everything together for the first time. Are they now facing a new challenge? It's like, well, great, I assembled this and took us to $3 million, but how do I get us to $100 million, right? So, every time we face a bigger challenge, these beliefs can start coming up in ourselves. And that's where this work becomes so powerful.
Absolutely. Now, in terms of, a lot of entrepreneurs who have already, so much into, done a lot of things, but in terms of this BPM framework, how do they get started, and how does a common person get started with this BPM framework? Is it a different way to adopt this method, or is it the same for everyone?
It's the same framework for everybody, and it's just adopted different way, right? So depending on what you're looking to accomplish, and this is where I use breath and this framework three different ways, right? So I use it tactically when you're in a situation to regain control, to overcome decision fatigue, to be able to kind of recenter, reground, step into your power. So I use it tactically. I use it strategically as well. So strategically, what we're doing is we're expanding what's called your window of tolerance, which is your ability to handle more chaos and more disorder, right? Successful people don't have less stress. They just have better stress management techniques, right? So whether I'm working with an individual or a team or a company, right, what I'm doing is I'm helping them upgrade their ability to transform bad stress into good stress. And that is helping them handle more chaos, more adversity, bring more innovation into the workspace, and so on. And then finally, when I'm working with individuals, I use BPM a third way, which is to really get down to what I call the operating system of us. And this is our identity, our beliefs, right? It's the unconscious programs that we run a lot of times. And what's fascinating is when we get into an hour-long breath work, we can start reprogramming some of these breath work. We can start reprogramming some of these beliefs, and we can start allowing some of these things to come out. I use a very specific breathwork style that's trauma-informed breathwork, and it's very powerful as an ability to start shifting some of these identity beliefs.
Right, right, John. Now, when we talk of peak performance, how do you help your clients understand about their peak performance? Because peak performance might differ from people to people. Should I be stressed about the level of my peak performance, or how do I evaluate where do I need to reach? Because as I said, it's different for different people. How do you tell them that this is their peak performance? Beyond that, it's the fall. How do you tell them?
Well, when you get into peak performance, it's also a lot of people refer to it as flow, right? So it almost, you'll know when you're in flow. It's the kind of day where everything felt like it just came in place. Even if you had adversity, you felt like it was at the right level to overcome that adversity. It didn't feel overwhelming. It also didn't feel boring. So one of the components of peak performance and flow is that you actually have a certain amount of adversity, a certain amount of pressure, a certain amount of challenge to overcome. And what happens, what you'll notice when you're in flow is almost like time slips away. Like you step into a timeless space and you don't recognize, and you sometimes, like I've experienced this during heavy meditation, like you're in heavy meditation and all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, it's been 3 hours. I've been meditating. I didn't even recognize it, right? It felt like 3 minutes, right? It felt like 30 minutes. I had no idea. But this peak performance and flow is almost that meditative state, but you're working. You're in a productive state. You're doing something that's productive, whether it's painting, it's sports, it's actually business. That is a big thing. If you get in, and I'm imagining you've probably experienced this a couple times in your life, that all of a sudden it's just like something became timeless. And that's really one
Right.
of the areas that I say, if you've never experienced that state or you've experienced it, like such an amazing day. Everything fell into place and the day just went by and it wasn't too fast or too short. I just was in it. I was totally immersed in it. That's where, I help you recreate that more often, right? I help you give the keys to get into that state more frequently.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like time flew by. We have done 24 minutes, 57 seconds till now. And there is so much to learn from you. So there is, as I said, there is so much to learn from you, John. And I'm sure a lot of people would like to learn from you directly, learn more about you, about the work you are doing, and about reaching their peak performance. So,
Mm.
what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's through my website, John Hall Coaching, JOHNHALL coaching.com, or you can just Google John Hall Breathwork. I'm going to show up. So John Hall Breathwork or johnhallcoaching.com, and you'll find me there. I've got information, including free access to my site on overcoming imposter syndrome. So if you've ever felt like, man, I stepped into something new and it feels like I don't really belong here, I might be found out, this is the course for you. And then there's other courses available or how to work with me directly.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.